In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create these 3 procedural stylized glowing rock materials. So these materials are actually all just one material, and we're going to be joining the material into this custom node group, and then you can control the customizable values to make many different variations of the rocks. And so you can see just by changing some of the values, I've created these 3 different procedural glowing rock materials. So the stylized glowing rock materials have many different customizable values. So you can change this scale value to change the size of the entire material. Then we also have this cool rocks distortion, so you can make it more distorted if you want to. And then we also have this rocks scale value, so you can make the rocks smaller if you want to. Then we have this really cool rocks variation. So you can see if I turn this up, you're going to be able to see more of the emission color, and the rocks are kind of going in there. So if you want to make like some lava and have some rocks popping out of the lava, you could do that, or you can drag this up if you want to see more of the rocks. Then we also have the rocks detail, so you could make the rocks less detailed if you want to. And then we also have this cool rocks lacunarity value. So if you turn this up, all the rocks are going to be kind of cracked, and there's going to be many small rocks. You can just see by turning that up, the rocks are kind of chunky and kind of cracked. Then we also have the different rock colors. So we have rock color 1, and then we also have rock color 2. And then we also have the emission color, so you can make any color you want. Like if you want to make it look like a lava rock, you could have like lava coming through the cracks and make it kind of an orangey red. And then we also have the emission strength. Then we have the roughness of the material, and then we also have the bump strength, and then finally we have the displacement strength. And the displacements will only work in the Cycles rendering engine, so if you are creating this, make sure you're using Cycles render if you want to use the displacements. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase these materials, then you can get them on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And if you like using procedural materials in your artwork, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my procedural materials, pre-set up for Blender's asset browser, with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also check out my procedural material packs if you'd like to just purchase packs of 10 materials. And you can get all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist. All the links are in the description. Alright, so real quick, I'll show you my scene setup if you want to set up the Blender file the same way that I have. So I'm going to press Shift-C to make sure the 3D cursor there is in the center, and I'll go to the Add menu, let's go to Mesh, and I'm going to add a icosphere. And I want to add an icosphere because I want a nice round detailed sphere, because we're going to be using the displacements. Now, right after you add the icosphere, before you click away or move it around, you can click right here behind me to open up the Add Icosphere settings. So just open that up. And I'm going to turn these subdivisions up to 6. And then I can just close those Add Icosphere settings, and then I can use the Object Context menu to shade the object smooth. And then the default objects in Blender are quite large. Using the real-life modeling scale in Blender, this object is a bit larger than an average human. So I'm going to scale this object down, and I'll scale it down by 0.1, hit Enter, and then using Control-A, we can apply the scale. So this is now the object's new default size. So now this is maybe the size of a large rock. And then with the icosphere selected, you can duplicate it with Shift-D, and I'm going to make 2 more of them so that we can have the 3 different variations. Then I also added a camera, and I pointed the camera at the objects. And with the camera selected, if you go over here to the object data properties, I turned the focal length up to 80 just to kind of zoom the camera in a bit. And to change the size of the camera, if you click right here to go to the output properties, you can change the resolution here if you want to make it a very long image so you can see all the rocks. Now for the lighting, I added these 3 area lights right here. So if you go to the Add menu, you can go to Light, and you can add an area light. And then if you select the area light and go here to the object data properties, I turned the power of this one up to 600, and I made it a very slight blue color. And then I turned the shape to rectangle, and I changed the X size to make it kind of long, and I pointed it down on the objects. And then these 2 other ones are a little bit less bright. They're only about 300 or 400, and then the color is a blue color. And I have these kind of back here pointed on the sides of the spheres to give kind of some rim lights. So I'll go up into the rendered view just to see how that's looking. And then also to get some nice realistic lighting and reflections, if you go over here to the world properties, I added in it this Abandon Workshop HDRI. So this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link will be in the description if you'd like to download it. So I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version from Polyhaven. So once you download the HDRI, you can click here on the yellow dot next to color, and you can choose environment texture and then just open up the HDRI. And I turned the strength down to 0.5, so it was just half as bright. Now I want to do a few more things in the render. So if we go up here to the render properties, if you click here on the film tab, you can choose the transparent button, and that way the HDRI will still light the scene, but you just can't see it in the background, so it's not quite as distracting. And also here on the render engine, I am using cycles because I'm going to be using the displacements, and the displacements don't work in Eevee. Now also, if you go down here to the color management, I'm going to be using the View Transform of Filmic and the Look to High Contrast just to pop out the colors and make things more contrasty and saturated. Alright, so now let's go over here to the shading workspace. So in the shading workspace, because I have these three of them, I'm just going to have this one up here, and then I'll have the shader editor right here. I need to hit the escape key to go back to the shader editor. So now if I select this object here, I can click on new to add a new material. And you can just rename the material to whatever you want. And then because I'm not working with these two objects right now, I'm going to select these objects and press the H key just to hide them, so I can just see this object. And I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up to go into the rendered view. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the tutorial to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit and you can go to the Preferences. And then if you go over to the Add-ons tab, here on the search, you can search for node and just enable the Node Wrangler add-on so it's built in a Blender, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So to start off, we are going to be adding a Voronoi texture to get the rocked crack texture. So I'll go to the add menu and we're just going to start to type in Voronoi. We'll just add the Voronoi texture, and then because we turned on the Node Wrangler, I can Control Shift and select the Voronoi texture to preview it. Now, also with the Voronoi texture selected, I will press Ctrl T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. And I'm going to plug the object into the vector because the object coordinates is going to place the textures on the object more evenly. And then here on the F1, I instead want to change this to distance to edge, and this is going to give us the cool crack texture. Now I do want to change some of the settings here. So I'm going to turn the Voronoi scale to 14, and I'll turn the detail to the max of 15 so it's very detailed. And then also the roughness here, I'll turn this up a bit to a 0.65. So now you can see we have these cool little cracks, and then we have more detailed cracks in the bigger cracks. Now here on the edges of the cracks, they're kind of straight, and so I want to add a noise texture to distort the edges of those cracks to make it look a bit more natural. So I'll press Shift A, we'll go here to the search, let's add a noise texture, and if we put the noise texture between the mapping and the Voronoi, that is going to go through the vector. So if we put it right in here, the vector is telling the texture how it's going to be placed on the object. So because the noise texture is between the mapping and the vector of the Voronoi here, it is distorting the placement of the Voronoi texture. Now let's change some of the noise texture settings. So I'll turn the scale up to 15, and the detail will also turn up to 15, and then the roughness I'll turn up a little bit to like a 0.55. Now that is distorting it way too much, and so I want the noise texture to have less of an effect over the Voronoi. So I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for the mix color node, and we'll put the mix color after the noise texture. Let me click on these nodes, just box select them and bring them over so I have a bit more space. Alright, so what I want to do is use this mix to mix the noise texture and the mapping, and then we can control how much we want to use of the noise and the mapping. So let's take the mapping vector, and we're going to put that into color A, and then we're going to take the noise texture factor, and we're going to put that into color B. So now if I drag this factor around, you can see if the factor is 0, it's only using the mapping, so it's not distorted at all. But then if I turn the factor up, it's going to distort it more and more. Now as I drag this around, you can see that the texture is moving around a lot. So to make that not happen, let's click on the mix here, and we can change this to the linear light. So this way now as I drag the factor, it is distorting it, but the texture isn't moving around so much. So now here on the factor, I want to make it a very small number, so I'll turn it to a 0.02. So now I can see the edges are just distorted a little bit. So now I can kind of reorganize these nodes, so I'll just box select these nodes and kind of move them in, kind of bring these over here so we have a bit more space, just to keep that nicely organized, maybe even bring that up there. So now let's create the base color. So what I first want to do is make it a bit lighter, so I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp after the Voronoi. So to make it lighter, I can just click on the white tab and I can drag it over, and that'll make it much lighter. So I'll just turn it to about there so you can see the texture a lot better. So now to make the custom colors, I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for another mix color, and we'll put the mix color here after the color ramp. Now the color ramp color, we want that to be going into the factor, so the black and white values from this color ramp are going to determine what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. So I'll Control Shift and select the mix again. So now we can make the different custom colors for A and B. So for color A, I'm going to make this fully black because I do want it to be pretty dark. And then on color B, I'm going to make this kind of like a mid dark brown color, so something like that. And if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using, if you click on this color and go to the hex value, you can punch in 6F5236. So that's the exact color that I'm going to be using. So let's now take the result, and I'm going to put that into the base color, and I can control shift and select the principled shader to preview it. So it doesn't really look like rock right now, and that's because it doesn't have any bump. So let's take this Voronoi texture distance value, and we're going to stick this into the normal to give it some bump. But you can see there's some weird shading issues, and that is because we need to convert this black and white data into normal data that the shader can use. So I'll go to the add menu, we're going to search for the bump node, and we'll just stick this here between the Voronoi distance and the normal. And then to actually convert it to bump data, we want to take the distance and we want to put that into the height value. So now you can see it looks nice and bumpy. Now that is a bit too strong, so I'm going to turn the strength down to like a 0.4 so it's not quite as strong. And later in the video we'll be adding the displacement, but right now we're just adding that fake bump. So that does look a lot more like rock. However, it is very shiny, and so I want to make it more rough because rock usually isn't shiny unless it's very wet. So here on the roughness, I'm going to turn this to a 0.725. I think that is a pretty good value, so it is more rough. Now I also want to make the emission texture to make some of the rock glowing. So to do that, I'm going to click on this distance, and I'm going to drag out here, and then I will let go. And this way we can add a node at the end of that value. So I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll do the color ramp factor. So click here, and then just drop it there. And then I want to control shift and select the color ramp to preview it, and I'm going to drag it down a bit farther, and then I'm going to click here and I'm going to drag it out so that it is bigger so we have more control over it. So now I want to create a white value wherever I want the emission to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is switch these values. So I'll drag the white tab over here and then the black tab over here, and by switching the values and dragging the black tab way over, it's very contrasty. So now you can see just those little cracks are going to have the emission color. Now I do also want to have a few other colors in the other parts of the rock. So I'm going to hold down the control key and click here to add another tab, and I'll just drag this one over so it is very close. Then I will hold down the control key and click again to add another one. And on this one, I'll click here on the black color and I'll make this fully white. So now you can see there is more white areas right there on the rock. And I'll drag this over so it's pretty contrasty. And I'm actually going to drag this one over so it's a little bit bigger, just like that. Then I'll hold down the control key and click here to add another one. And this last one here, I'm going to make this one back to fully black. So basically we are making the little white part, and that is where the cracks are going to be. And then this second white one, that's going to be just a few other areas where there's some white spots. So you can drag this around and make it more contrasty by dragging them closer together. And so I'm just going to go with something like that. So wherever the white parts are, that is where it is going to be emitting light. So now I want to create the custom colors for the emission. So I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search again for the mix color, and we'll put the mix color after the color ramp. And just like we did before here with this color ramp, we want to take the color and we're going to put that into the factor. So now the white and black values are going to tell it what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. So for color A, I'm going to make this fully black. And then for color B, this is going to be that bright blue color. And the hex value that I'll be using, if you want to use the same color that I'm using, you can go to the hex and you can punch in 44ADFF. So that's the exact color that I'll be using. So now we can take this mix result and we can put it into the emission. So what we can do is click here to open up the emission, and then we want to take the result and we want to put that into the color. Now any color which is fully black, that will not be emitting light. So just where it is brighter and just where the colors are, that's where it'll be emitting light. So I'll now control shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now here on the emission strength, you can turn this up to make it brighter, and I'm going to turn it up to 7 so that it is pretty bright. And there we go, we now have the cool glowing rock. Alright, so we can now add the displacement to make the rock look really cool. So for the displacement, I also want to add another color ramp to control the values. So here on the Voronoi, I'll click and drag over here and let go, and then I can search for another color ramp, so color ramp factor, and drop this here. And I'm actually going to add a reroute by holding down the shift key and then right clicking and dragging over that wire to add a reroute. And I can drag this over here just to keep my nodes nicely organized. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I just want to keep the node wires very organized. All right, and I actually want to drag this one out a little bit as well so I can control it a little bit better. So I can Control Shift and select this color ramp to preview it. So any values that are white, those values are going to be popping out of the mesh. So I can drag this over and we can make it more white, and so those values will pop out more. But to actually see that taking effect, let's unplug the color from the surface, and we want to instead plug it up to the displacement. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now, to actually make it pop out of the mesh, we need to, again, convert this to displacement data. So we're going to go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for the displacement node, and we'll put this here after the color ramp. And then we actually want the color ramp color to be going into the height value. Now you can see it does look like it's adding some more bump, but it's not actually popping out. And so why this is happening is because we need to go over here to the material settings, and we need to go down here and open up the settings and then open up the surface. And right here on the displacement, you can see this is set to bump only, but we want to change this to displacement and bump, and that's telling the material that it can use the displacement. And also, if the displacement is still not working, you need to make sure you're using the cycles rendering engine. All right, so I'll close those settings, and I'll just make this smaller so we have more space. Now you can see it's popping out way too much. It's like really big, and that is because of the scale here. So I've found that a scale of 0.011 works pretty good. So now you can see that it's not popping out that much. But now I can drag this white tab over, and you can see if the values are more white, it's going to be popping out more. So I'm going to drag this white tab way over here, just drag it over there so it's popping out quite a bit. And there we go. So there's the finished procedural rock material, and you can see the rock is popping out, but then the glowing parts are kind of going back down in. So now we can join this together into a custom node group. So I'll click and drag to box select all these nodes, and I'll press Control G to join it together into a node group. And if you press the tab key, that'll go in and out of the node group. So we'll go out of the node group, and we're going to drag this node group over here, and then we can add the same name. So I'll just call this like Rock 1, and let's drag this out, and then I can hit tab to go back into the node group. Now, if you press the N key to open up the side panel, we can click here on group, and you can see that there's the interface here so that we can control the custom values. So I want to click on the BSDF, and I'm going to drag it up here and then let go to bring it up to the top. And then I also want to click on this, and I want to rename it to shader. So if I go outside of the node group, now you can see it's shader and displacement. So let's go back into the node group. So now we can go over here to this group input, and we can plug values up to the group input, and then that way we'll be able to control those values outside of the node group. So I first want to control the overall scale of the entire material. So this mapping is plugged up to all the textures. So we can take the scale and we can put that into the extra socket. And then if we click on the scale, you can see it is 3 values, but I just want to make it 1 value. So let's change the type to float instead, so it is 1 value. Now the texture is missing. That's because we need to turn the default value back to 1, and then we need to go outside of the node group and we need to turn the scale back to 1. So now that'll control the overall scale of the material. So we'll go back into the node group. Now I also want to be able to control the rock's distortion. And so this value here, the linear light, that is going to add distortion. So we'll click and drag and drop the factor into the extra socket, and then I can rename this to rock's distortion. And then I want to control the rock scale. So this Vorno texture here, we can drag that scale to change the size of those rocks. So let's put the scale into the extra socket there. And then if I double click on this, I'm going to rename it to rock's scale. Now I also want to control the rock's variation, and this roughness will do that really well. So let's take the roughness and we'll put that into the extra socket, and then I can rename this to rock's variation. And then I also want to be able to control the detail and the lacunarity. So let's put the detail into the extra socket, and the lacunarity, put that into the extra socket. And then if I double click on these to rename them, I'll rename that to rock detail and rock lacunarity. Now I want to control all the colors. So I'll drag the group input right up here, and we have these 2 colors here for the rocks. So I'll put this into the extra socket and also B into the extra socket. And if I double click on this, I'm going to rename it to rock color 1. And then this one is going to be rock color 2. And then I also want to be able to control the emission. So this emission color here on this mix, color B is going to control that. So we'll take B, we'll drag this up here and stick it into the extra socket. And then I can rename this to emission color. Then I want to control the emission strength. So if I drag this kind of over here, over to the principled shader, we have this strength value. So I can put that into the extra socket, and that's already called emission strength. And then I want to control the roughness. So here's the roughness value. We'll just put that in there. And then I want to control the bump strength. So we have this bump here, here's the strength, so let's just put that into the extra socket, and right here I can rename this to bump strength on that side panel. And then the last thing that I want to control is the displacement strength. So I'll drag this group input over here. Let's take this scale and I can put that into the extra socket, and then I can rename this to displacement strength. All right, so I can drag the group input right back over here. Let's just drag it down here, and I'll hit tab to go out of the node group, and I'll press N to close the side panel. So there is the finished rock material. So I'll now press Alt H to unhide the other objects that we hid, and I'm gonna click and drag, and I'm gonna drop this material on both of these objects. But then let's click on this one, and I'm gonna click on this button here to duplicate it, so the material is different, and I'll just call it rock 2. And then I also wanna click on this button here, it says 3, I'll click on that to duplicate it, so now it is a separate material, and I'll rename this to rock 2. So we have rock 1 and rock 2, and then this one here, let's do the same thing. So we'll click on this little button here, that's the little file icon to duplicate it, and this one we'll rename it to rock 3, and then if we click here on this button with the number, that'll duplicate it and we'll rename it to rock 3. So now they're all separate even though they look the same, so we can now just change the values. So I'm now going to be creating this green one over here. So for the scale, I want to change this to a 1.18. That will be pretty cool. And then for the rock's distortion, I'm going to turn it to 0 because I don't want it to be distorted at all. Then for the rock scale, I'm going to turn this to a 20.6 so that it is smaller. And then for the rock's variation, I want to turn this up, and I'm going to turn this up to a 0.722. So that is looking a lot different now. Then let's go down here to the rock's lacunarity, and I'll turn this to a 2.8. And then for the emission color, I'm going to make this green. So let's make it a cool green color. And the exact color that I'll be using, if you go to the hex value, you can punch in 35C120. That's the exact color that I'll be using. And then the emission strength, let's just turn this up to like a 12. And then I think the displacement strength could be up a bit. It could be turned up a bit so that it's a bit more bumpy. So the displacement strength, let's turn that up to a 0.015 instead. So it's just a little bit more bumpy. All right, and then let's do the other one. So I'll click here on the other one and we'll change these settings as well. So for this one, I'm also going to turn the scale to a 0.180, and then for the rock's distortion, I'll leave this at a 0.02. Then for the rock scale, I'm going to turn this to a 15.7. And then for the rock's variation, I'll leave this how it is at 0.65. And then let's go down here and change the emission color. For this emission color, I'm going to make it a bright red color, so something like that. And if you want to use the same exact color that I'm using, over here on the hex value, you can punch in FF4800. And then here on the emission strength, I do want to turn this up a bit, so I'm going to turn it up to a 9. And then I will just leave the other settings how they are. However, I do want to pop out the rock just a little bit. So here on the displacement strength, I will turn this to a 0.15 again. And then one thing I forgot to change the rock lacunarity. So let's change the rock lacunarity to 4 instead. And now that's looking much more cool. You can see that rock lacunarity is kind of breaking up the rocks and making many little different chunks of rocks. All right, so you can save this again with Control S, just save the file, and then I will render this and then we'll do some compositing. All right, so I rendered the image by clicking here on render and clicking on render image. And then after I rendered the image, I went over here to the compositing workspace, and then I clicked on use nodes here to use the nodes, and also I turned on the backdrop. So now let's just do a little bit of compositing. So I first want to add a denoise. So I'll go here to the add menu and we're just going to add a denoise, or if you've done the denoise in the render, then you won't really need to add this, but I like using the denoise node, and I'll change the accurate to fast. And then what I also want to do is add some glares. So I'll go to the add menu and we'll add a glare. We'll drop this here, and on the streaks, I'm going to change this to the fog glow instead. And then here on the quality, I will make this high quality. And then I want to have 2 of them. So I'll duplicate this with Shift D and just drop that there. So there are 2 of them. And then at the very end, I just want to make the background black. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for the alpha over node, and we'll drop that after the glare. Now to make the background black, we're going to take the image from the glare and we're going to put that into the bottom one. And then this top image here, we'll make that fully black so that the background is black. And then let's Control Shift and select the alpha over node, and that'll add the viewer node. And so now we'll just let it composite, and adding the glare is really going to add a cool effect. So you can see now there's a nice glare on the material. So then to save this image, you can select the viewer node, press the N key to open the side panel, and you can click on save this image and save the final image to your computer. So that is it. That is how you create these procedural stylized glowing rock materials. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel to help me keep on creating these free tutorials, a great way to do that is by purchasing the project files, and you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, and my Ultimate Material Pack comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also check out my procedural material packs to purchase packs of 10 materials, and you can also get all of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender Procedural Material Tutorial playlist here on YouTube. And if you'd like to help support the channel here on YouTube, a great way to do that is by checking out the YouTube memberships by clicking down there on that join button next to the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to send me a little tip, you can use the super thanks feature here on YouTube underneath this video, and I do appreciate all of your support. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.